Okay, so we will get that one. So we started looking at last time the first three levels of the presentation on the three kinds of suffering. So we have a presentation under the First Noble Truth, the truth of suffering. And as I was saying last week, why does the truth of suffering comes first? If the actual origins of suffering, the causes of suffering is what we have to address, why doesn't that come first? And the Buddha was quite deliberate in this, placing this cause and effect sort of in that reverse order, because first of all, we have to identify within the Buddhist context what we call suffering. Yes, there's this suffering of the first level that we all get, aches, pains, grief, loss, all the disturbing emotions, etc., etc. But then we last week also looked at that more subtle level, the suffering of change, and what we think is a source of happiness based on the senses becomes a source of unhappiness because it's subject to change. And then, so looking at the third level of suffering, which is called the suffering of conditionality, or the suffering of sometimes compounded existence, suffering of, it's got a few different terms. What was that? Extensiveness? No, not that I've heard. Maybe in some translation. Yeah. So, which is the fact that no matter where we're born in this realm of samsara, what we call samsara, and the nature of having a body subject to suffering, and even within this life, even we're having neutral experiences, it's not either pleasant or unpleasant, even it just is, we're still in the nature of being conditioned by the very fact of having a samsaric body, having these contaminated aggregates. By the very fact, we're conditioned by the causes of suffering, which is the ignorance, confusing reality, ignorance that grasps it as self-existent me, okay, that doesn't exist anywhere except in our hallucinated mind, ignorance and craving. So particularly the craving of existence, craving and grasping. So the craving at being, at existing, and the grasping at this self to be permanent, unchanging, forever. Okay. So in that way, this is a much more subtle level. It's so that we see no matter what sort of conditions we have in life, in this life or in any other life, no matter how good it gets, we are always going to experience suffering, because our job is to see how we can, everybody's job, even the ant's job, see how it can minimize suffering and be comfortable and in a world and be like that. Okay, so that's that third level. So in terms of the four truths, or noble truths, we have this quote from Maitreya Buddha: suffering is to be known. So the sense of whichever levels of suffering, we're going to look at those in a little bit more detail this morning, is to be known. In other words, to be identified. You go to the doctor and they go, that's what's wrong. Now, what's caused that? What did you do? Or, what are the causes for your suffering comes next. So the first one is the suffering is to be known, to be identified, to understand the different layers of that, the subtleties of it. And then the cause of that, which we say the karma that throws us into which rebirth. So here we are with our precious human rebirth. And even like yesterday, I was thrown a question. So it was nice to have a debate with a Dharma friend. Why do we pray for a precious human rebirth? So I had to sort of unpack, this is not just having a human rebirth, because what he was saying was, look at the world. You know, do we want more humans who are doing so much damage to the world? And so, as the Dalai Lama says, you know, these are not claws, these are not fangs. Elevate yourself above the animal realm. Sorry, poor doggies. Well, they're lucky. No, they're not poor doggies, they're lucky doggies. I've got a Dharma practitioner who's there. Not wonderful. So to not act in that animal way, that's not what we're born for. We're born to use this limitless potential of our mind to transform our mind. And as Buddhist practitioners, we get that, you know, to whatever level we're so-called good at it or not, you know, we can do it. We're working on it. We're all in training. But the majority of the world, just look and see, are not doing that. Or not even maybe aware you can get control of those negative emotions and so forth. So I was debating with my friend. I said, I'm still not going to give up on human beings, even if we're all tiny percentage of the population. What alternative is there? You know, take it, and you know, the point was that humans have done much more destruction to the planet than animals. But I think if you look at I didn't raise this point, but now I've got another point to go back into that. What about the harm animals do to other animals? Well, gazillions for breakfast if you're a shark. So you've got to think of we've got to identify the full picture. That's why we like to debate, to sort of, but have you thought of this? Have you thought about how many sentient beings are swallowed up every day for breakfast in the ocean? Okay, we don't do that. So suffering is to be known, the cause is to be abandoned. So once we identify that cause is to be abandoned. Or it says, yeah, the causes are to be abandoned. So sometimes it says cause and sometimes origins means the same thing. Why am I suffering? Well, you created the causes for that. That's where we had previously modeled on karma and looked at that. You know, some of those causes at the very beginning, those who were healed, mind in its potential, or those we looked at, you know, all the different afflicted, not all the different, but the sort of categories of different afflicted states of mind, based on ignorance, our desirous energy and aversion, anger, through poisons from mind, the things that are to be abandoned. And then in Maitreya, this translation of Maitreya's, the quote from Maitreya is, health is to be achieved. I quite like that. It's sort of a bit more achievable than true cessations of absolutely everything in my mind stream. Health, physical, mental, emotional, every health. And we're talking about health, not that the doctor would say, oh, you're a healthy being. We're talking about the sort of the health of great yogis who've had all these realizations where they, you know, put the electrodes on and they go off the scale. They can't measure the level of their happiness or their equanimity or focus, concentration. So that's health is to be achieved, or as we have here, the truth of cessation, which means cessation of number 2 of everything that's causing me suffering. Cessation of that is to be experienced, is to be achieved. And using this health analogy, Maitreya Buddha says the medicine is to be taken. So this is in the analogy where we see the Buddha as the ultimate doctor, we say ultimate psychologist, ultimate knower of the mind scientist. Or so the truth of the path is to be cultivated. So we cultivate that by following the Dr. Buddha's advice. Do this, do this, do this, do this. Okay. So that's in a nutshell the 4 truths. So we're going to unpack more, as I promised, the first noble truth. So here we have a quote from the Buddha directly. So this is from the Discourse of Turning the Wheel of Dharma. So this is the first teaching of the Buddha. So this is why it's called the Discourse. It doesn't say of the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. It is the first turning. It was bringing the Buddha's, that Dharma teachings into this world system. So of course we also acknowledge that as a very auspicious day in our Buddhist calendar. And it's also celebrated along with it being the first Sangha, the first ordained Sangha. I don't know if literally the Buddha ordained them right there. Well, within the discourse of the turning of the wheel. Because there were people whose minds were just ripe and they just needed that. They needed that encounter. They needed that Dharma, the Buddha's unique teachings on dependent origination. And then, got it. And as the Buddha first taught that his fellow seekers of truth, they were ready. At first they weren't. They were like, oh, Buddha, he lost the plot, he took some sustenance, they were practicing ascetics, and they heard he was on his way. No mobile phones then, no. Anyway, just as now the grapevine was working. Oh, he's on his way, we'll just ignore him, because he gave up the practice. And then they saw him, and they saw this magnificent aura, this magnificent purity, and they just threw themselves at his feet and said, whatever you've got, we want to know it right now. So wonderful. The rest is history. Okay. So we can be very grateful for them as well. So the Discourse of Turning the Wheel of Dharma. So this was an extensive teaching. So it would make sense that within this time, because he's addressing them as fully ordained monks, bhikkhus. So within that time, we would have had the first ordination. Now, this bhikkhus is the noble truth of suffering. Aging is suffering. Now, when we say aging is suffering, in the Buddhist context, aging starts at conception. The next moment. We don't think about that in our world system. When someone's pregnant, we don't think, well, the baby's getting older already. Or maybe we do. Maybe we do so that because it's developing, right? Develops. In any case, that's how it's regarded. And so by the time the baby comes out, it's already had all those experiences in the womb. And if you had a clairvoyance or so forth, you will be able to know what those experiences are, which is how we get the teachings on them. I'm not going into those. The noble truth of suffering, aging is suffering. And of course, maybe not, there may be suffering in the womb, right? There certainly is suffering of birth, and that's one of the forms of suffering, not just for the mum, but the suffering for the child being born and squeezed. The text goes into elaborate detail, just in case you want to know. So that is suffering. Illness is suffering. We don't have to be told that. We know all the different levels of illness, but we can include here physical illness and mental illness, which in the Buddhist context is any arising of any afflicted state of mind. A little bit different again if we went to a mental health professional. I remember going and a counsellor, and it was a whole sort of process of dealing with anger. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to, fake anger. I don't want any more anger in my mind. I'm not going to put it on for you right here and now. Thank you very much. That's another moment. So I wasn't very cooperative. Patient. No, it's okay. I'll work on something. Oh, that's called meditation. Yeah. Death is suffering, of course, suffering for everybody, but particularly the person who's leaving their body behind, and the stages of death. So we looked at that in the module on impermanence and death, or death and rebirth, definitely. Okay, union with what is displeasing is suffering. So this is what we don't want. And again, different beings, according to their level of practice, as I was mentioning about these great yogis, the level of practice may experience, shall we say, either no suffering or very minimized suffering, like Tara Lama, the Austrian woman who met her Lama when she was 19. When she was 20, she went to, he said, come to Bulgaria, and she went there. He trained her for the 3 years of preliminaries. She went up into the mountains the next 20 years. And when she came to Sydney and was asked, from your experience there and your experience off Sydney, what's the difference? She said, nothing, it's the same. So in that way, not being thrown around by externals. However, 20 years of meditator's knee, she had a very hot and swollen knee, which I immediately emphasized with, gave her advice and potions and everything else. Suggested she see a doctor, and she did. So she had the inconvenience of that, just like the Dalai Lama has the inconvenience of a cold or cancer, or those things, the treatments. Yeah. So there's a condition of having a body. Separation from what is pleasing is suffering. We're having a nice time, it ends, etc. Not to get what one wants is suffering. And of course we say, and getting what you don't want, like, you bought me a carrot cake, I really wanted chocolate. And we have an attack of something. Take it back. And I'll talk to the manager, talk to the chef. In brief, the 5 aggregates, our body and mind, subject to clinging, grasping at existence, are suffering. So that's the presentation by the Buddha, and then all that gets unpacked. All right, so the first thing, as it said, the truth of suffering, the first noble truth, is to be known, is to be directly known, is to be identified. So we need to train in that, to know what the Buddha's teaching is on the noble truth of suffering. Of course, we're training to become fully aware of when suffering is present, not because we want to have more suffering. But of course, if I say right now, there's pain in my knee, and then I look at that pain, it's a bit different to just getting, oh, it hurts. There's a different experience, isn't it? I'm looking at that, yep, there's a pain. And then I think, oh, there's a cause for that. What's the cause? Go to the doctor, treatment, etc. We have a good health system, etc. So we train to be fully aware when suffering is present, not because we like it or actively seek for it. We seek the opposite. And while I'm talking about physical, really we want to get to the actual more subtle, what mental states have propelled my experience of suffering. Because I think maybe I said it last time. Pain is like a given, suffering is optional. So that's coming from the mind. You know, friends of mine who are working in pain management, this was back in the 80s, and they were saying they've worked out that actual physical pain is about maybe 4%. The rest is our elaboration on top of what is there, what isn't there. So it's quite, it feels very much from its own side, doesn't it? But actually, it's what our mind, and we don't want to not have a response because we want to be able to take the remedial action. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, when Annie Curran, who compiled the Lamrim outlines and who's been teaching at Tashida Kopan Ministry for 50 odd years, 50 plus years. And so she had, Venerable Roger was explaining, this was decades ago, to Rinpoche, that she had a frozen shoulder and that she was going down and getting treatment. When you say going down, they're up on the hill, so going down to the Bobador or get treatment. And Rinpoche didn't know what this frozen shoulder phenomena was, and so Venerable Roger explained, and went, "Oh, I have that." Like, Venerable Roger's like, "You do? Oh, maybe we should get some treatment for you." It's like, "Yeah, I have that too." She couldn't prostrate because it was so painful. Rinpoche could. So, there is that, when we're getting treatment for things that are painful, and they tell you the best thing is to use it, and it's painful, and it's like, you've got to be joking. My best idea is to minimize the pain. Yeah, unless you're lungs over. So it's because to recognize, yep, that's the reality. I am suffering. My mind is disturbed. Is what the sense of, as the Buddha said, dissatisfaction, discontent, all the disses. Yeah. So investigating that mindfully, particularly being able to, as the moment a delusion and affliction arises in our mind, to be able to identify it, that's the first moment. And as it says in the 8 verses, confront and avert it after that. As if it's so simple, but training ourselves to be aware and to discover the causes and condition that gives rise to that, as well as, the Buddha didn't leave it there, he said, but there's a way out, there's a way to be free of it. That's why you go to the doctor. So the doctor said, can't do anything, you'd be rather depressed, because even it's like, maybe you can't do something medically, but there's all the support systems and everything else that come with it. So on that. So how do I get out of this state? And then on the other side, in terms of the 3rd noble truth and 4th noble truth, also mindfully investigating what is actual genuine happiness, what is that, and what causes that to come about, how can that help, and to be able to distinguish the different levels of, as I think we talked a little bit more last week, about the different levels of pleasure as opposed to some form of genuine happiness, because we're always, all of us, whether we're animals or humans, seeking and looking for genuine happiness. So we're able to also discern what's pleasant, what's unpleasant, what's neutral, what experiences are conducive to my long-term well-being, what are detrimental to my overall sense of health and happiness, that we investigate all of that. So not leaving it as at the 3 levels of suffering, then we have 6 and 8. It's just, can I opt out at number 3? Actually, number 1 would be good. Yeah. It's not like that. It's really unpacking those. So the suffering of the indefinite nature of samsaric pleasures. This is the part of the suffering of change. Whatever happiness they bring doesn't last. The chocolate runs out. You know, that book of Lama Yeshe's, I don't think people read the title right, because the book flew off the shelves. It wasn't saying, here's some chocolate. It was saying that when the chocolate runs out, what to do. Maybe we just will identify that. It was a very good title, when the chocolate runs out. What do we do about that? So, you know, whatever, anything based on the senses, based on our physical senses, which in the Buddhist presentation is the aggregate of feeling, feeling not being emotional, feeling being a physical experience of pain, pleasure, or neutral feelings. So that's about a result of past karma. So if you had a whole bunch of neutral karma, you know, a lot of neutral karma, you might find that your life is in meditative absorption, because you've created the conditions for that. But even that doesn't last, because then it's like, okay, well, that's all very nice, but get up the path, become a Buddha. That's what a Buddha says. So, so nothing that is a source of happiness on the basis of the senses, on the basis of feelings in the Buddhist context can last, because at the end of the day, even it lasts a whole lifetime. I'm not trying to think whatever sensation has ever lasted a whole lifetime. It doesn't, because we change moment to moment. But whatever did, at the end of the day, we give away the body. Well, we relinquish it. We don't really want to give it away. We have no option. Okay, so that's that one. And then the suffering of dissatisfaction, dukkha, discontent, constantly striving for more and better samsaric pleasures. So there's a quote here from the great treatise on the path by Samsara. This dissatisfaction, this mind, Lama Tsongkhapa calls it insatiability, like constant craving, you know, constant striving for more, better, different samsaric pleasures. So the quote here is, one quote here is from Nagarjuna's friendly letter to a friend, letter to the king, where he was giving advice to the king. It says, each of us has drunk more milk than would fill the 4 oceans, yet those in cyclic existence who act as ordinary beings are intent on drinking still more than that. In other words, wanting more lives, more lives, more lives. You get what you want, use it up, then acquire more, and still you are not satisfied. What could be sicker than this? Okay, there's a point. Okay, and then Chandra Govind, letter to a student. What being has not come into the world hundreds of times? What pleasure has not already been experienced countless times? Well, Lama Zopa Rinpoche said in the teachings of the Vajrasattva retreat, when Rinpoche led the 3-month Vajrasattva retreat, 1999 in California. Same year he led the 3-month Chenrezig retreat. How very wonderful to have those who were able to participate 3 months with Rinpoche. And that's what he said, there's no new taste in samsara we've experienced at all, even though the, you know, advertising tells us this is a brand new taste. It's just like Buddha said, we've experienced every taste there is. So stop looking for a new taste. Really? I mean, enjoy what you have. There's no point not enjoying. What luxury, this is obviously very culturally specific, such as splendid white yak-tail fans, have they not owned? So we've had every possession, every luxury, every wealth, and so forth. Yet, even when they possess something, their attachment continues to grow. There is no suffering they have not experienced many times. The things they desire do not satisfy them. There is no living being that has not slept in their bellies. So why do they not rid themselves of attachment to cyclic existence? So this is the idea of, developing disenchantment with cyclic existence, a mind wishing for a definite emergence. And then it goes on and goes through all the sufferings of all the different runs. So this becomes part of that contemplation. So I find it good to have all these different quotes that something there will resonate. I've chosen ones that resonate for me, but there's many, many more and many teachings on this. Okay. The suffering of leaving the body and again and again, again and again. So, in other words, experiencing death again and again. The only thing is, we don't remember last time we experienced death. So we're freaking out about when it's going to come. And the older we get, the more we freak out because somehow we managed to live this long. All the conditions came together very nicely. Time's running out. And they're going to prioritise my life and how I'm going to prepare for my death. And I haven't quite nailed that death meditation yet. Yes, and I didn't check this. I left 2 out, but the next one in relation to that is joining the body again and again. So that suffering of birth again and again, and suffering of being born. Where baby comes out and cries and says, "Oh, I've done it again. Here I am back in Samsara." Oops. Sorry, kid. There's no way back. I'm not doing it back. Yeah. Being facetious. I think. There you go. That's handy. You have to be careful of this. I don't know about you, Trace. Have you had babies? Have you had babies?
Sorry, myself?
Have you had babies? Yes.
No, only these ones.
Yeah.
No, I haven't had children.
And puppy dogs. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, and again, as I said earlier, in the text, Buddhist text, it goes through in graphic detail all the, it's sort of pretty intense on the sufferings of birth. It's in here too, but I thought I wouldn't go there. It's very intense. The suffering of rising and falling, so is the suffering of, well, here we are with the best possible conditions, precious human rebirth, but all the conditions to practice Dharma, and we find that as difficult, however difficult we find this. If we look at the options, which are, being in hot hells and being in cold hells and being chopped off and killed 1,000 times a day and put back together, it's pretty intense. You squash between mountains. Yeah, very intense suffering. And then the hungry ghost well and the constant craving, the addicted mind, the dissatisfied mind, because you definitely never get what you want. So we can cycle again and again from top peak of existence, almost out of samsara and pushy God rounds, and then fritter away all that positive karma because we're having too good a time and we're not experiencing the suffering of a forced body like this. See, this is why it's best to be born human. We get that it's possible to have this happiness. We haven't said, I don't believe I can have genuine happiness. Thankfully, we haven't said that. But also we know what it's like to suffer. So on the basis of this body, we can develop infinite compassion, infinite love towards ourselves, towards others, and also the mind of aversion that says, I don't want to keep experiencing this again. So the result, next one, the result of a collection coming together, like the collection is the aggregates. It can be any other collection, but any collection. So the collection of everything that makes up our body and mind is its dispersal. Of meeting leads to parting. So every meeting, so inevitably, relationships end. My parents, their relationship ended when one of them died first. So they had 63 years of marriage. Pretty amazing. We wanted to celebrate every single year and they didn't want it. Just like, we don't know anybody else who's been married that long or been in a relationship that long. It's very interesting. It's of a certain generation. I mean, my siblings have all been together for decades. They must be following in their footsteps. So good to see. But we know that it's going to end sometime, don't we? And so not any meeting leads to parting, and life leads to death. So that's one more contemplation. And the next one I left out was the suffering of loneliness when you are that one left behind. It's terrible, sometimes people die because they miss their path, isn't it? They die soon after that. The loneliness of being without a help, that you have to do everything for yourself. And also, of course, the being born, well, we're born alone, but straight away we've got all the supports. I mean, without our mother caring for us, however long that happened, without all the support, the family and medical profession, etc. We couldn't fend for ourselves, but definitely we're dying alone. So even the people who do a pact to die together still die alone, because it's still your death, it's not theirs. Okay, and then this quote from the Buddha: so long as you follow attachment, satisfaction is never found. So the attachment mind that's craving for satisfaction, we can debate this. Has it ever given you true, lasting, forever satisfaction? Mind. Because why? Because that mind of attachment exaggerates the positive qualities of something, so it's not in sync with reality. A person, a place, a job, a car, a house. I didn't want to say to my brother when Christmas time, showing off their brand new renovated house. No, I think it was the first time they created or had created, and that did a lot of work, but daughters did as well. So they had to design it of their own. It's that dream of my dream home. So they've got their dream home. I don't want to go, but the dream's not done. In a few years' time, we're going to be saying, why did we get that bathroom? We need a step ladder to get into it, etc. Well, they can enjoy it. They can, as long as they accept it's not going to last, that's fine. Satisfaction is never found, is it? Is it? I mean, we can have something close, surely. What have you ever been satisfied in? I'd say satisfaction of doing a good job. Of course, that doesn't last, but at least enjoy it while it does. When Tsuma Tenzin Palmer, I wasn't so much on the satisfaction, but when she ordained, so she tells this story when she ordained. She had a friend who was like a princess, one of those European princesses, who invited her to her mansion. And Tenzin Palmer said, I've just renounced worldly stuff. You know, I'm a nun. I can't do that. She said, yes, you can. You can come here and enjoy it while you're here, and then you can go off and enjoy your cave. So that sort of mind, you can enjoy it, right? Quite happily enjoy, but not expect it to be the source of your satisfaction. It's a big difference. Knowing that it's not going to last, maybe even would make it more enjoyable. People have gone away on holidays this weekend to enjoy their time away. I hope they're enjoying their time away. They probably won't enjoy being in the traffic and finding their way home, but they know it's not going to last, so they make the best of it. So enjoy it while you can. And then the Buddha said, whoever reverses attachment with wisdom, so reverses that mind of craving, grasping, attachment to the satisfaction must be out there somewhere. The lasting happiness must be out there somewhere. And here the Buddha says to reverse that. So generally we say for attachment is to, you know, for that relinquishing of attachment is to practice non-attachment, to be aware of that mind of attachment, but go there. As you've heard me say, long as I've been saying, go into the shopping centre, look where the mind goes, but don't buy. See? But the mind of wisdom says, I think is going to give me lasting happiness, want, and we investigate. And you see, it's all just a trip. As Lama would say, it's all just our trip that we've made up. So if we analyze that, then we do have satisfaction. We enjoy, you know, even without having great, you know, stability of realization, it gives a sense of freedom. We use our intelligence, basically. Yeah. Okay. All right, then we go on to the 8 sufferings. We've already gone through the suffering of birth. Maybe I do have it. I've got a map that I have. So in this Lamrim Chenmo, Great Treatise on the Path to Enlightenment, Volume 2, this whole section is really, really extensive. So, what I want to point out here, so we're not talking about the physical act of birth, but birth is suffering because it is the origin of suffering. By being born, coming into another samsaric existence, it's like on that basis of that body, we're going to experience and do experience from the beginning suffering, physically, mentally, emotionally. And being born with that suffering, it's also, it's the origin also of the afflictions, the disturbing states of mind which cause further suffering. Right? So, you know, we talk about as the 3 poisons, the ignorant mind of confusion, you know, we sync with reality, grasping at a self that doesn't exist inherently. On top of that, we want to cherish that self. So we create not only me, but mine. And then we have the mind of attachment. When attachment doesn't get what it wants, we have the mind of aversion. Or we get rid of it. So that's how it all plays out. And also, thinking ahead, birth is suffering because it is an unwanted separation. In other words, when I was at that conference, happiness conference, with Venerable Gyatso sitting next to me, and the presenter said, what's the single greatest cause of death? We said, birth. He said soul. We said birth. We're all right. Because it pervades. It is the same. That pervades all realms of existence. We all have to die. You know, my mother, being a good Catholic mum, said, you know, when I said Oh, I didn't ask to be born when I was a horrible teenager. So negative, everything negative. The parents. See, they didn't reject me. And she said, well, I didn't ask to have you. And then I met the Dharma and thought, she was right, I was wrong. Apparently I did ask, grasping out of body, grasping to be born. But she didn't necessarily, she was just having a good time. They were just having a good time. They didn't ask to make a baby, but they made quite a few. There was no excuse. They also didn't have a television. We didn't have television. Too much information. Okay, the suffering of aging, which we said starts from conception. But if we look at it in terms of what we know as aging, I like this. So this is a quote from the Buddha in the Extensive Sport Sutra. As aging progresses and we pass a certain point, we are like a tree struck by lightning, withered by old age, like a terrible, terrible, decrepit house. O sage, speak quickly about an escape from old age. Age makes attractive bodies unattractive. Age steals our glory and our strength. Age steals our happiness and subjects us to insults. Age takes our vigor. Age begets death. And so then there's a quote from Jindala. It says, the pain of death is horrible, but brief. How horrible is aging? As my mother said, it's got nothing going for it. Just living. However, Gamapa said, it is well that aging happens little by little. If it happened all at once, it would be intolerable. Suffering of sickness, illness. The same Buddha Sutra, the same sutra, Extensive Sport. In deep winter, I was thinking this may not relate to WA. In deep winter, wind and great blizzards take the vigor from the grasses, shrubs, trees, and herbs. Does it relate? A bit far-fetched for WA.
Summer.
Oh, we're getting to that. We're getting to that. In the same way, disease takes the vigor out of living beings. It breaks down their faculties, physical appearance, and strength. It will drain a great fortune in wealth. I think that's when you pay all the. We were in Sunshine Coast before. It's called God's Waiting Room, and so there's a lot of those orthopedic people making their fortune.
Skin cancer clinics.
Oh, yeah. So it will drain a great fortune in wealth and brain. I guess when you don't have the wealth, you battle with your brain. Disease constantly humiliates living beings. It harms them and is contemptuous of beauty. It torments them like the sun beating down from the sky. That we know. That we definitely know. Suffering of death, we definitely know. Suffering of separation, we've talked about being parted from what you like. I mean, I remember when I was younger and had, wasn't wearing robes every day. And you'd have your favourite clothes. And I'd go into denial about the fact that I was wearing out. But at some point, you'd embarrass yourself if you wore it out. And so you had to relinquish. It's no longer your favourite one. I've got to change my fashion because that doesn't work anymore. Judgment. Separation, being parted from what you like. I still got an image of, I'm just thinking of a particular pair of pants. Still got the image of it. That's tragic. The suffering of not obtaining objects of desire, not getting what you do want. And so what happens as a result of that? If somebody else gets it, jealousy arises. That's why we practice rejoicing. Fantastic. You got to go on that pilgrimage, that retreat. You got to whatever. It's a bit of that possibly going on at the moment, because I hope, because Jala Rinpoche will be teaching and it booked out very, very quickly. And so, some people experience perhaps the disappointment of not being able to do, but I think they'd rejoice in people who quickly. Yeah, so the suffering of the contaminated aggregates, our body and mind, being in the nature of suffering. So it's unavoidable. Even our precious gurus have physical and, Dalai Lama, Zopa Rinpoche, Geshe Tashi Tsering, Rinpoche, Geshe Tashi Tsering, who's, currently recovering from stroke. So this quote here from Lama Atisha: the enjoyment of pleasures stemming from desire is as empty as reflected moonlight. So of course we have another module coming up on emptiness, but that idea, it's empty of being permanent, of lasting, and so forth, just like reflected moonlight, right? At the very most, it's going to last until the sun comes up. But we also know it's a mere reflection. It's not the moon. It hasn't enough substance. As fleeting as an echo. Same thing. So we use these analogies. The Buddha used these analogies so we can get a taste for that, a sense of how it is. As illusory as a mirage. When we know it's not real, but it looks like, it does look like, the shimmering of the heat on the road, and it looks like the tires are all melting. Yes, sometimes it is, but generally it's not. But that we see the shimmer, but it's not. There's no water there. Let's say no liquid there, substance. As dependent as a reflection. Again, if you stand in front of the mirror, it's going to reflect what's there, like it or not. Geshe Sutramma, a Chenrezig Institute, talked about, an older monk. And so at the monastery, this was obviously some years ago, at the monastery, they used mirrors, but then he went to make a phone call. Those phone boxes that have little mirrors back in the day? We're going back. And he saw this aging face and he was so annoyed. He had no idea. Best not to look. It only reflects what's there. It doesn't create anything on top. But when you walk away, it's no longer there, is it? So best not to think. So we use these analogies just to get a sense of that. It's dependent as a reflection. So then it says, into the vast ocean of kleshas. So this is all the sufferings, the rivers of birth, decay, sickness, and death flow unceasing lifetime to lifetime. So in the Guru Puja, we have that verse, violently tossed amidst waves of karma and delusions, plagued by the many sea monsters of the many forms of suffering. So this idea that we're drowning in an ocean of suffering, looking for a life raft in the rivers. Oh, here in the rivers, they'll go to the ocean. In the past, I was bound by the karmic power of impurity. So this is Lama Atisha saying, I was bound in the past. So the implication is that he's now free of being bound by the karmic power of impure deeds. So here we have the fact that, Lama Atisha, like yesterday we had the Vajrasattva practice here in the afternoon, and this was a strong practice of Lama Atisha, that any time the thought impure thought arose, he'd get down off his horse and put his stupa there and do Vajrasattva practice. So you can see that had its effect. No longer bound by the karmic power, would it imply that you have been liberated? Sure. He's not saying I'm liberated. He's saying I'm no longer bound by the karmic power of impure deeds. But today I'm able to fulfill this life. In other words, take the essence of life and develop all the realizations. So why not seek after the Dharma? So do like me. Have your stupa, your car, modern day horse. When you can safely get out of the car and when road rage comes or annoyance comes. Yeah. Anyway, practice. All right. So just a bit more, yeah, on these presentation of the Four Truths. So the First Noble Truth. So we talk about different, that each of the Four Noble Truths has 4 aspects or 4 things to be meditated on. So very first is that of impermanence for the First Noble Truth. All of this has been saying everything is impermanent, nothing is reliable in samsara, nothing's going to last, etc. The very first teaching of the Buddha and the very last teaching of the Buddha was on impermanence. And so here, to meditate on impermanence, it's thinking that this body-mind continuum, which we call contaminated. Why contaminated? Because they're not the pure aggregates of a Buddha. It's contaminated by our karma and our afflictions, disturbing states of mind, is impermanent because they're produced from time to time. They don't last forever. We come into existence, we go out of existence. But also we could say each moment of our existence is also impermanent, particularly when we think about that in terms of our mind, because that's the most important thing that we can change. If it wasn't impermanent, we couldn't transform the mind, just whatever we had, we'd be stuck with. And we know that's not true. And so this counteracts the idea that this body-mind is permanent, it's going to last. Okay, so that's the first one. And so we meditate on the impermanence of the body-mind. It's in the nature of suffering. So it's the second one. It's what we've been talking about, the nature of suffering, because it's under the it said outside influence, but we often think of it as being an internal influence. The outside influence being like the karma that throws us into this existence, which is based on the moment of our previous life, what ripened at that moment of death, being the moment when the consciousness leaves the body, not the moment when you stop breathing and declare brain dead, or you declare dead, but when the consciousness leaves the body. So the influence of that, plus all the afflictions that come along as part of the package, because those states of mind, negative, destructive states of mind, we haven't yet pure. So that overcomes the idea of this body-mind continuum as being a source of pleasure. We've talked about that, as being pleasurable and as being pure. Another quote here from Lama Tsongkhapa. So this is from Chandra Goman's letter to the student. The more you conceive all beings as happy, the more dense the darkness of your delusion becomes, the more dense the darkness. The more you conceive all beings as suffering, the more the darkness of your delusion lessens. And in fact, we'd also say, as a Mahayana, aspiring Mahayana practitioner, it's also if I see the suffering, I can cultivate compassion, caring, concern, kindness towards them. It's not what's being said here, because it's just on the basis of this is the middle school, which is the practice to do for seeking liberation from this for ourselves. Okay. The more you contemplate what is pleasant, the more the flames of attachment spread. Isn't it so true? The more I sort of think about that chocolate cake, think about, it gets more and more delicious in my mind. But actually, if we look at it, where's the deliciousness come from? The mind. It doesn't come from the side of the chocolate. It comes from my mind. Because if you look at all the ingredients of the chocolate cake, which bit of that is the deliciousness if you take it all apart? And you say it's altogether the deliciousness, but then it would be delicious for every being that had it. Sorry, delicious for me. I'm really disappointed. I use chocolate cake as example so often, which don't worry, I happily found somebody who would find it delicious.
I'm just trying to work out in my mind what's the difference between afflictions and delusions.
Yeah, they often get used interchangeably, but in the way that they both distort reality. They're the same. But, to my mind, the delusion is more like a pervasive state of mind. We're all deluded on the basis of this grasping mind. We're automatically deluded about reality, which is like a hallucination. So we talk about this innate self-grasping, which is the mind of ignorance, which is a deluded mind that gets it all wrong. It being innate, in other words, we're born with it. So if you watch, whether it's a puppy child or a human child or any other baby, the sense of self, which is distinct from others' sense of self. And I really noticed this when the first time in my family, twins were born, both very different beings. Right, definitely brought your own mainstreams. It's interesting. It's definitely had all the other conditions were exactly the same, except their own mainstream. So we've already got that whatever layer of darkness on our mind from that root delusion, without which we wouldn't come into existence. But then I think when an affliction arises in the mind, so then that's more the fact that an affliction rises up in our mind is not always. So there's one level of being deluded. We have to be careful because often it's just used interchangeably. So, I think as the affliction being that more temporary thing that arises in our mind, that might feel very pervasive because we've done it a lot, and the more we practice it, the more good at it we are. So, yeah, so it's a good thing to investigate. The flames of attachment, desire, the desirous mind. Again, because we elaborate on top of what is there, what isn't there. And then we think it's going to fulfill all my happiness, it or they or whatever. The more you contemplate what is unpleasant, the more the flames of attachment abate. I mean, this sounds rather depressing. I've just got to think about everything being unpleasant, But you could say, where's the unpleasantness in the chocolate cake? well, I would say eating it. I mean, not know the consequence for me of eating it would be an unpleasantness. So that's what I'd say for me, but other people would not agree. You'd have to eat a whole lot more, and then it would be unpleasant.
Suffering that then pleasure is temporary.
Yes,
Even if you like.
that is a suffering. Yeah, that
And if
any
you don't,
pleasure.
if it doesn't agree with it,
There's an immediate sense of the unpleasant if it
Okay.
doesn't agree with you. Yes.
Excuse me, Venerable.
Yes.
Sorry, what did you? I missed what you said. The more you contemplate something unpleasant, the more what?
The
What was it?
more the flames of attachment, that desire abates. Right?
Okay.
So this is where you think, well, where is the deliciousness in the chocolate? Because one of my monk friends said, you can't love chocolate. He said to someone who said to him, I love chocolate. He said, you can't love chocolate. You can crave it, like it very much. So just so that we interrogate those experiences and go, is that really a source of my happiness? I'm not trying to put anyone off eating chocolate. Cafes will go out of business, I think. Okay. And so in the nature of suffering goes under that. Yeah. And the idea of the aggregates, the body and mind as being pure, this is where, particularly in relation to the body, there's those meditations of, well, just look at where this purity starts and stops, you know, the whole idea that beauty is skin deep. And even then, as it said, as you age, that you're robbed of that. And who defines what beauty is anyway? Who defines that? It changes over time according to if you see all the artwork over time and the sorts of bodies that were deemed beautiful at one point and the sorts of bodies that are deemed just like not those stick figures type thing. It looks very tragic to me. I mean, there are many people who are malnourished. Why make it a look? Why not just care for those who aren't? But it's thinking that it's pure, and so we'll take the body apart and let's just look. Particularly, I mean, the Buddha introduced this for the monks who, had desirous attachment to the female form. And so by the time they got through a meditation on taking all the bits of the body apart to see where the gorgeousness of the body is, it sort of did the trick. Does the trick. Okay. So we can analyze anything like that, anything we're craving that we might say, I know smoking's not good for me. I mean, I think with smoking, it would seem to me that it wouldn't be too difficult to analyze the unpleasantness, the unpleasant effects, right? So where's the pleasantness in the ritual, in the smell, awful smell, in the taste in the mouth? I'm not sure where you would define the pleasantness of that.
I wonder if someone who, being a smoker myself, not anymore, but it's almost like 4% of the pain is the actual physical pain.
Yeah.
96% is the mind.
Yeah.
96% of the positive experiences are
96. Yeah.
Yeah. You tell yourself that
I'm being one of my mates. I'm looking cool. I'm,
Tastes good. It gives me a break. This, that. All the stories that you tell about.
You tell yourself. Yeah.
And because it is an attachment, you exaggerate the positive.
Yes.
So,
any attachment, we exaggerate the positive of, most definitely. Any attachment. We can like something, we can enjoy it, but not feel that is the source of my happiness, and it's fine. But when it becomes that grasping mind of attachment, which it does straight away, we live in a desire realm. This is called a desire realm. So we're very well fed. That desire is very well fed by society. It used to crack me up. I don't look at them now, but women's magazines, so-called women's magazines. Anyway, why do they still have women's magazines?
There are men's magazines.
No, but why don't you just have non-gender specific people's magazines, you know, or fluid gender well, there are, just not making as much money.
I have women shampoo, the men shampoo. I don't know if the shampoo knows that.
There is women and men's shampoo, and women and men's a lot of things.
Yes.
Yeah, so they can charge women more. But what would get me in these magazines, on one page they've got the U-Butte diet, and on the next page they've got chocolate cake recipe. And it was just like, it's a bit of mixed messaging going on here. Yeah, conflicting messaging.
Venerable,
Yes, Tracy.
would it be the same? So you mentioned more towards the beginning, like the 4%
Yeah, pain.
of pain is the same of the feeling of pleasure. So it's actually only really 4% of,
Well, it's even maybe
and then all the rest is mental.
a barista said. The coffee, you know, when you order your coffee, you only actually taste the first mouthful. Is that true? Yes, you only actually the rest. So where's your deliciousness? Where's your pleasure? It's not pleasure. You're caught up in conversation. You're more interested in that. Probably even thinking about it is the most pleasure. Smelling it coming. So, you know, you could save yourself a lot of money and just whiff the next person's coffee. Or just say, give me a, not even a demi-tasse. Oh dear. Demi-tasses are super strong, right? Yeah, don't give those. Okay, the next one. So in the nature of suffering, because we think it's pleasurable, the next aspect to meditate on is emptiness. In other words, in terms of the body and mind, there's no separate entity, even though I grasp at this permanent me, I grasp at a sense of me that is permanent, that is independent. As my mother said, I was fiercely independent when I was 4 years old, and I realized I wasn't, I was just stubborn. I mean, it took me a long time to realize. It took me a teacher saying to me, you go meditate on stubbornness. It's fascinating to meditate on stubbornness. Oh, it's gone from a solid block to a thick sludge. I made progress. I made progress. Anyway, my poor mum was being kind. Frustrated, probably. So devoid of this sense of an independent self that is permanent, that is partless. So when we say partless, this is about a school looking at non-Buddhist schools, yes, but also schools of Buddhism, the sense of, I mean, it sort of comes up in the next one with selflessness. But here, that there must be something from the object side. There must be, it can't all be dependent arising. The Buddha said it's all a dependent arising. Everything's dependent. And you think, no, the table's out here from its own side. And there is indeed conventionally a table here from its own side. However, the table I perceive to be table, that I create a permanent, we call generic image. That's my image that I impute. Otherwise, I couldn't call it table. Because I didn't have that, you know. So we cognize, we perceive what the eyes perceive, shape and color. And then my mind goes table, and then it makes that a permanent fixed thing on top of table. But if I was an ant, that would be one hell of a mountain to climb, wouldn't it? Or one heaven mountain to climb, but it would be a mountain to climb. So this is this aspect of we label it that, and then we concretize that. we have this sense of that being permanent. Anyway, I'm going further than I meant to go. There's coming up in another module down the track, a few modules along. But there's no sense of a different entity because we say it's my table, it's my body, it's my mind. So who's this entity who owns this? So there's no permanent, partless, independent self. You know, in the 70s, I was also part of the, you know, sort of radical lesbian, separatist, feminist movement. There was nothing separatist about it. In fact, we just thought like that. Because if you analyse that, how can you not be, and still living in Melbourne, like it wasn't like I'll go out to the bush somewhere. But even you go out to the bush somewhere, and people did, South their women's communities, you're dependent on that. You're dependent on, you know, you still got to get supplies. Someone's got to go into town and get some supply. There's no independence. So this we interrogate. Right. And then selfless. So also, so empty, we say, of inherent existence, of true existence, of existing out there, independent of my engagement with that, which gets to be very tricky then. Because then, you know, you have all these discussions. So does something exist if no one perceives it? You know, so you get into all this. Yeah, something exists, but it being table, it being chair, it being tree, it being whatever we want to label things, depends on that being labeled, which we do. And then we elaborate the story on top of that. I didn't need to go into that detail, but it just came along. And then selfless, again, this sense of I do not exist as a selfless self. Nothing exists independent, selfless. So this counteracts another school that has an idea of a self-sufficient self, a substantial, self-sufficient, existent self. So when you go further studies way along the track, you look at these different schools of Buddhist thought. They're getting more and more refined. The most refined was, you know, particularly in relation to what Lama Tsongkhapa refuted all of the just very fine details to come up to think, no, what the Buddha taught. Everything is interdependent down to the teeniest, tiniest particle of being. Is not an independent particle. There's no like one particle that exists independent of everything else. That's a lot to meditate on, just with the First Noble Truth. So you could spend lifetimes on just that one, right? So any comments, questions?
I've been meditating on the truth.
Yes.
With different little podcasts that I've got.
Yes.
That I've downloaded. The more that I listen to it, the larger it becomes. The larger it becomes.
It's no, yeah, we come in and we get, it's like with karma, it's just like cause and effect, positive brings a positive, negative brings a positive, I get that. And then like you're saying, with meditating on the Four Noble Truths, listening from different, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
My spreadsheet, you know, like spread graphs and going down what you did today, and it's like getting larger and larger and larger.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you know, just start with.
It's the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more, but that's good. That's what we're doing. We get a sense of the general framework or general idea, and then you go, oh, but there's more. There's more. There's more. That's why for myself personally, I have never, I mean, I've had many, many teachings on the Four Noble Truths, never yet enough. I mean, it's just like understanding it's another thing, you know, it takes a lot. So it's fantastic. And meditating on, listening to different podcasts, getting different maybe perspectives or words or examples or things like that. And that just really enriches our understanding. So that's fantastic. Yeah. And then we look at, how is this making a difference to my life? You know, how do I apply this in everyday life? How does that make a difference? And, you know, things pop into your head. Oh, true. Oh, yeah. Look at my grasping mind. Look at my mind. I thought I was sort of being very neutral. I'm not being neutral at all. You know? Yeah. And just as curiosity, not as beating ourselves up, because before we were doing that and didn't even know we were doing that. But there it goes. Wonderful. All right. Anyone else? Okay, we can leave it there today. Got through number 1. Okay, we've got 4 sessions. 7 sessions. 7 sessions. 7 sessions. We will do the dedication prayers and one last prayers here. Oh, it's all in Tibetan. We can, you know, maybe go back to the English version if people like, but it's nice to do in Tibetan. So we're on page 8, just the first 2 verses. Gewadi nyududa lama sange drugune jowa chika malu pa de sala popa shu chanchut sencho rinpoche make panam ge fuchi ge pa nyamba me pa ya gone gonu pa shu. Geshe Sotum said to us in relation to Guru Puja, that actually for newer, for us beginners, good to do in Tibetan, because you get the blessings of that, because you know the Tibetan language was created for the Dharma. Oh, yeah. And then those who are more advanced to do in English. However, we'll do the long life prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama in English, and then the prayer for swift return, Lama Zopa Rinpoche in English. Incomparably kind and supreme Tenzin Gyatso, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. May you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then the prayer for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Peerless teacher, an assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Sravakas and Prachika Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now, holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings. Through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable, venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, deceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the 3 jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly be in glory for fortunate disciples. Long life prayer for Tenzin Oso Rinpoche. Lord of Dharma, who in accordance with the various dispositions of those to be subdued, makes clear in the light of your well-spoken advice the sacred Ganden tradition, essence of Buddha's teachings. Foremost and holy Lama, to you for us supreme, we make this prayer of supplication. Lama, please live long.
So I also just wanted to mention, hot off the